Imagine showing someone your art collection and they ridicule it. Or worse yet, it's art you yourself created and they call it kitsch. That's what folk artists everywhere have been up against since the beginning of time. But as Laurie Brown found out, when it comes to their folk art, Nova Scotians take a back seat to no one.
Welcome to the wide, wide world of Nova Scotia folk art. This fish helicopter was made by Leo Naugler. It could be yours for $5,000.
It can flash in eyeballs for the eyeballs. We can flash lights up top of it. And I got an 8-track stereo and a black and white 12-inch television into it.
Meet Kyle Jackson, a Haligonian artist who says folk art works for him.
You could just drop folk and just call it art, you know. But it's more fun to say, hey, come on over and check out my folk art collection.
And meet Eddie Mandaggio from Italy Cross, Lunenburg County, perhaps Nova Scotia's most respected folk artist. He knows what makes a good piece of folk art.
I like to see something solid as can be. You can tell if a man or anybody took any time and any patience to make something. This is the ones that I would prefer.
Folk art. They say you either get it or you don't. Well, over the last decade, there's been an alarming increase in the number of us who do get it. And that's created a booming market for Nova Scotia's folk art. But it's also changed the nature and the character of the work. Gone are the days when folk artists hung signs on their mailboxes and sold their work for $5 and $10. Case in point, this folk art symposium in Halifax, titled Folk Art, Is It All Over? Collectors, dealers, and academics argued about how money and exposure have changed folk art and the kinds of people making it. But folk art is a slippery topic. They couldn't even agree on a definition. But boy, did they try.
Folk art is a kind of catch-all, I think, for any number of objects that we like, but which just don't fit the establishment's academic standards.
Folk art is an art that's valued for being artless.
Pieces like these, pieces that'll, bring a smile to your face and give you a nice warm fuzzy when you think of the guy you bought it from.
Don't try saying that anywhere near Lower Kingsburg, where collector Chris Huntington lives. He's credited with getting folk artists serious attention for their work. So when he hears folk art reduced to novelty souvenirs, he sees red.
Chatelaine magazine did an article where they referred to pieces as table toppers, and there have been other people who have talked about the cuteness and the fuzziness and the warmth and the fun of this Nova Scotia folk art and its affordability and things like that. And, if you don't think seriously about what people are saying, it just becomes sort of ingrained in you that this is not really art. It's some subliminal other thing.
But after spending 15 years traveling the back roads of the South Shore, Huntington quickly realized there were many carvers like Eddie Mandaggio out there, unaware of each other, quietly working away in woodsheds, creating work he knew to be something much more than lawn ornaments. Mandaggio helped put Nova Scotia on the folk art map, and Huntington thinks he's not only one of the best folk artists around, but one of the best artists, period.
And I used to work in the woods, and I got a bad case of the nerves, there's no doubt about it, and I had to have something to quiet my nerves down, and I started painting first, and then carving, and playing around that way.
Now, when you started carving, did you know of anybody else that was doing folk art?
No. I had no idea that it even was folk art, my dear woman. I didn't. I had no idea. Just done it. We stood them around the lawn and places, just for ornaments, till somebody seen them.
And then what happened?
And then it was hell to pay the rest of the time from up until now.
Hell to pay for Mandaggio, perhaps, but folk art pays the rent for the owner of Holy Mackerel in Mahone Bay. She sells a lot of Mandaggio's work and thinks she knows why. While many of the newer folk artists on the block come to carving with a mind to make a buck, Mandaggio's attitude is quite different. Cindy Schultz says that makes his work different.
He couldn't care less if he ever sold a piece of folk art, and I think that separates him from a lot of the other artists.
She also understands why people are coming from all over to buy. It's because they can.
It's easy to get to, it's affordable. You know, it's very rare that you can go to an art gallery in a city and see artwork that you can go down the street and buy for $100.
But like any kind of art, folk or fine, it's all a matter of personal taste.
So many people come in here and start laughing, and then that's, you know, that they got it. A lot of people come in here and look like they can't find the quickest way out, and then you know that they just didn't get it.
Schultz is riding a trend that some fear may ultimately kill folk art, but the commercial aspect of folk art has been around forever. Traditionally, folk artists were the people who decorated your boats, painted your mantels, hooked your mats, all for a price. So there's nothing new about that. What's different is that over the last 20 years, folk art has moved from the houses of Nova Scotia into art galleries around the world. The Art Gallery of Nova Scotia has mounted an exhibition of paintings by Maud Lewis, perhaps Nova Scotia's most famous folk artist. And from here, it heads out for a 3-year, 9-city national tour. Maud Lewis died in 1970 after selling close to 2,000 paintings. How would you describe them? Naive, primitive, childlike, she painted a rosy picture of rural Nova Scotia that Walt Disney couldn't have dreamed up. Virginia Stephen is the deputy director at the gallery and organized the Folk Art Symposium. She says it was Maud Lewis who started the new direction folk art has taken, away from the practical to the purely decorative.
She began a whole wave that was probably happening at the same time as the end of modernism in the art world. There was a huge amount of activity in the arts that moved away from really cold, inaccessible art to art that was more accessible, more understandable, and had a little bit more populist appeal. And that folk art movement happened at the same time. Maud shows a world, or a vision of a world, that is fun and light and clean and nostalgic, and a place where we probably all want to be in our dreams. And it was very much her dream world.
Maud Lewis painted oblivious to the outside world, and that has always been a big part of the appeal and intrigue of folk art. It soon became a popular outing for the people of Yarmouth and Digby counties to visit Maud Lewis and buy a painting. Many of those same people visited the exhibition in Halifax.
It's probably the best attended and most popular exhibition we've ever had.
Lewis painted for the income, so when a customer asked for another painting of her kittens or her covered bridge, she was only too happy to oblige. Now, in the fine art world, art created only with money in mind very quickly gets a reputation as a cheap date, and the obliging nature of folk artists to reproduce their work has given folk art a bad name, and that name is craft.
I was sitting to the dinner table. I got an order for 4 geese, and before I was done eating, I had an order for 12 while I was eating dinner. That's how bad it was.
The outside world found Eddie Mandaggio. Caught up in the demand for his work in the 80s, he started to churn out his geese 6 at a time. That's when collector Chris Huntington first met him.
I went back into his property, and he was working in a little building there, and he was making a goose, and he was cursing, that he was having to do this goose, and he just hated doing it, and he said that, in the first place, there's no way I can make it just like the other one, but that's what they ordered, And, it's perfect. Wasn't it perfect? The best of the folk art is still living here in Nova Scotia today. The day I meet him, he's caught in this dilemma.
Cindy Schultz knows that the newer, mass-produced work may be sending folk art down the slippery slope from art to country craft, but says it sells.
We carry a bit of what I would consider to be more of a crafty type of folk art, simply because I'd starve to death if I sold what I love, and what I love is the true, real, sometimes crude folk art.
And artist Kyle Jackson would starve if he lived on painting alone. Co-owner and chef in a popular Halifax restaurant, He loves the folk art that comes from this province. And his own paintings have been described as heavily influenced by folk art. But Jackson has nothing in common with the traditional definition of a folk artist. Isolated? Not likely, with his own website where anyone, anywhere in the world can see his work. He was born in Toronto, is very much an urban person, and trained formally as an artist. Now, could he be a folk artist too?
Deep down, I like the aspects of folk art, you know, that freedom of expression and the carefree attitude. But the tag can be kind of almost embarrassing in a way, because I should be like putting my cigarette ashes out in my pocket with my hat on backwards. Nothing against these guys, but you know, you kind of want to have more intellectual punch or something in your work.
While Jackson has benefited from the interest in folk art, he sees how the line between folk art and kitsch is dangerously blurred and knows that's not good for anyone.
That's the problem, the kitsch connection thing. They produce all these pigs, you know, and so it's like all these pink pigs because they sold 2, so now they make 50 and they bring them to the show, all boxes of them. Then it's sad when the show's over because they're bringing out boxes back to their car going, what am I going to do with these 50 pigs?
The people that's buying knows the art and a lot better. And therefore, if it's half folk art, they know it. You can't fool me on it. And you can't fool those guys. And they're willing to buy when they see, like I tell you, the right piece.
Collector Chris Huntington knows there's still plenty of good art out there in Lunenburg County.
I'm not saying that there are hundreds of them or even dozens of them, but I'm saying that there was a nucleus of outstanding folk artists here whose work resonates from this culture and would hold its own in any culture. It's good enough to be in any museum anywhere.
Eddie Mandaggio refuses to mass-produce his geese anymore. And now, like any true artist, he only creates what he wants, how he wants. Mandaggio may be one of the last of his generation of traditional rural folk artists, but one of the first to believe that what he does is art. For The National, I'm Laurie Brown in Lunenburg County, Nova Scotia.